Hello, and welcome to my podcast, Good Grief. My name is Dr. Christine Malone, and in this podcast, we talk about trauma, tragedy, and survival. In each episode, I will interview someone that has gone through grief in some way, and we will discuss the impact it has had on their life. By sharing these stories, we hope that others won't feel alone should they be going through similar situations. Enjoy. Okay, listeners, thank you so much for joining me for this episode. My guest today is going to tell us some stories about his, well, we'll call it a dysfunctional, abusive childhood, and then, where he's come from that since then. So, guest, if you would go ahead and introduce yourself.
Well, thank you so much for having me on your podcast. I'm delighted to be here. My name is Merle Yost. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist in Ventura, California. I've been doing this for, 30 years or so. It's been a while. And most therapists, I think, have had difficult childhoods. I think our journey to becoming a therapist is part of trying to heal that experience. And it certainly was a part of mine. And also just my gratefulness for the work that I got from some really incredible therapists. And so we go back to, I'll just do the brief sketch of my childhood.
Kind of where you come from. What started, how your life started, I guess.
The lay of the land.
Yes.
So I was the middle child of three. I have a twin sister and an older brother. And we grew up in the backwoods of the Ozarks, in some ways, well, all that implies. And the biggest part of that initially was the isolation, because we were on farms. And so my only playmates were my siblings, and my older brother, 6 years older, did not really have much to do with the 12-year-old. Doesn't have much to do with the 6-year-old. And so that was really rough. And then the part is that my mother had this delusion of being ruler of the world. And so we grew up in this cult-like environment where we were isolated even more from the world. We weren't allowed to tell people who we really were. We'd be killed. We have all this stuff going on all the time. And the chief believes she traveled on spaceships around the universe, and she was related to Queen Elizabeth, and she was chief of the Cherokee Nation. I mean, it just went on and on and on and on. This was just daily stuff coming out in the family. And so that was kind of strange.
That's one way to put it.
But to us, it's just what was normal. We literally been indoctrinated from the very beginning. And so we didn't really have much in the way of social skills. I remember, I think it was somewhere around second grade, maybe. It was very early on. And this was when we were still living backwoods of the Ozarks. And I got invited by the most popular kid in school to his home for Halloween. And it was a very small town of 6,000 people. So, I mean, this was a really tiny town. And his house was literally across the lawn from the school. And I remember walking into their home, and I freaked out because it was the first time I had actually seen another universe that was supposed to be like mine, that had nothing to do with mine. And I literally crawled under the table. I was so overwhelmed and freaked out by what was going on. And I have no memory of what happened other than I was there for a while. But somehow they got me out and got me wherever I needed to go. But that was my first inkling. It was my first awareness that inkling, there was the word, that something was wrong with my world.
Right. Yeah.
And
I can relate to that. Yes. Okay. Yeah.
So that was really a pivotal moment in a lot of ways. And then my family moved around a little bit, and but we moved to another farm even further out from civilization. And it was about this time that my father, who was quite violent, not only in terms of beating us or whipping us, but if he get mad at one of the family pets, he beat it to death or shoot it.
Oh.
So it was, and we lived on a farm. We had pigs and chickens and rabbits, and I think we had as many as like 10 dogs at a time and cats, and it was just a three-ring circus. Massive gardens, and it was quite they were both farm kids from the backwoods of Illinois. And about the age of 9, my father came into my bedroom at night and began raping me.
Mm.
And that lasted for 3 years. It was, I don't have a lot of memory of that. What I do is I have a memory of the footsteps on the stairwell.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
And so what we know now is that dissociation, it can be caused by strangulation, cutting off somebody's air, and it causes dissociation. And I had complete occluded memory, which of course is the clinical word for repressed memories, because that was how I survived. But every time those footsteps started coming up the stairs in the middle of the night, I left my body and I went out the window. I was gone, because that was the only way that I could survive that. And the next morning, when I was supposed to get ready to go to school, thought of getting on that school bus made me nauseous, because I was not the same person that I was the day before. This was so brutal and so violent. And this went on for years. And it took about 2 weeks for them to convince me to go back to school. And nothing was ever the same for me after that. I felt this wall between me and the rest of the world that wasn't there before then, in a certain way. It was, and not being able to remember what happened, because I remember in that time before I couldn't get on the school bus, I had all these feelings going on inside of me, this sexual awakening of way before I was ready for that sexual awakening. And what we also know is that sexual abuse survivors or sexual abuse victims absorb the shame of the perpetrator.
Mm-hmm.
And so I had all this shame that I didn't know what that was either. I didn't have anybody to talk to. I had no language for all of this. I was just wandering. I was lost and this dissociation. And so I eventually pulled it together enough to go back to school and to function. But I was really never the same after that. It would really changed my whole experience of being in the world. And then eventually we moved from the backwoods of the Ozarks to Tucson, Arizona, and went literally from this isolated childhood to the middle of the ghetto in Tucson, Arizona, and it was overwhelming, because we didn't have the social skills, we didn't have any of that, and there's this language barrier at times, and portion is really hard. So those two things were really colliding in terms of making it really almost impossible to function in many ways.
Yeah. Now, when you moved, was the whole family still together? We still got mom, dad, and the 3 kids? Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, my brother left shortly after that. Or actually, he did not go with this initial. Sorry. He had gotten in some trouble and had to choose in between the army or jail. And this was at the height of the Vietnam War.
Oh, yeah.
But he ended up in Germany. He never made it to Vietnam. And so it was just the 4 of us going to Arizona. And my dad turned into this sweet guy. He had this complete personality shift, just like somebody transplanted a new personality in there. And I can only make sense of that from astrocartography. I don't know if you're familiar with that.
What?
Astrocartography is taking your astrological chart and placing it on the globe and seeing where your lines go and where you move into the world. It actually can really have a profound impact on your personality and what your experiences are and so forth. So he literally became a very different person. But it was too late for me, because I hated him. And I didn't know why I hated him. I just know that my blood boiled.
Yeah.
And so in between mom and her unbelievable stories and dad in the violence. And then by the time we got to Tucson, I was so dissociated. I don't know how I made it through as much as all the school I did and in college. Having been really smart really helped. It really saved me.
Yeah.
But it was there were just so many holes in me that it didn't work. And then as I went to, I always tell the story that my graduation night in high school, my twin and I are there at graduation, and she's crying, and I looked at her and said, "Why are you crying?" She said, "Because this is over." And I said, "Hallelujah, I'm out of here."
Different perspectives, yes.
And so that was, so I knew I was escaping, but I didn't completely understand all I was escaping from. And then I went to college, and my roommates thought you could probably use some therapy. And one of them was in uh, was in therapy with a therapist, and so I went to see her, and we actually hit it off really well. I spent like 5 or 7 years with her. I forget, lost, and so we she could every therapist I was ever with said you have all the symptoms of being sexually abused, but there was absolutely no memories of it, which, and I understand that I'm a specialist in sexual abuse now, but then it didn't. And then 1993, I was about to get licensed, but I was taking this new training with my supervisor called EMDR.
Mhm.
Eye movement desensitization reprocessing. And in the very first training with Francine Shapiro, she they wanted you to pick something small, a small T trauma, not a big T trauma, because you don't want to open up this huge can of worms in the middle of a training session. And so I picked my fear of tall buildings. I would look up at tall buildings and just about pass out. And this had been going on for years. Nobody understood why. I mean, I now obviously understand why. But what happened was about 30 seconds into doing this, my head went back, a cock went down my throat, and I was completely gone.
Oh, wow.
So that was the beginning of the memories coming back, uh, and also the beginning of a really profound amount of healing
Oh,
that
yeah.
happened. But it was really necessary to have some of that. I still don't have all the memories of it, and I've debated about doing ketamine and other things to more of the memories, but my real goal is simply to clear it out of my body.
Hmm.
I don't have all those memories. It's not going to assist me in any way.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
It's
so,
interesting you say that. I've actually in my life, I had a therapist recommend EMDR and explain it to me, and I didn't do it. And I said the reason why I don't do it is because I really don't. What are those dredging those things up going to do for me? So and it's probably partly, I don't know, I'm a chicken, whatever it is, but there's just a part of me that's just like, there's just things I don't think I want to know, right? It's like, what good would it do me to know? So when you started talking about EMDR, I thought, oh, I'm just curious to see how did that actually work for you? Because I've heard it work for people, but I've
oh,
always been
it's
extremely resistant. It's almost like you're going to pick into my brain and find something that I've got darn well hidden and buried, and I want to keep it there. So that's kind of my thought on that.
but I never the more memories that didn't really come back via the MDR, but we really were able to clear the trauma out of the body. That's
Mhm.
really the whole purpose of EMDR. EMDR is not to relive every moment of it.
Right.
Quite the contrary.
Yeah.
It's going to re-traumatize you. Welcome. They don't need to do that.
Yeah.
But can have an enormous impact on clearing it out. It's magical, actually, in what it does. I mean, it was a real paradigm shift in psychotherapy.
Yeah.
Well, I really am grateful for it. And I went on becoming I'm a, EMDR consultant, so I have the highest level of that. So I'm known for people coming to me to clear trauma.
Right.
that's
Right.
that's what if they come to me, they really probably have some really ugly stuff that they need to go through. I can
Yeah.
do that. So it's fine. I'm not afraid of it. They just say, "You're not afraid of it." It's like, no, I know
Yeah.
you can
Yeah.
survive the unsurvivable.
Yeah, that would be that's kind of my thing. Is I'm afraid of it. I'll be honest. That's fear. There's fear. I don't want to go there. So it's kind of been my thing with
I
that. But
I can get it to be. I guess uh, to me, it's about taking back all my power
Right.
and I'm unwilling to give them anything. And I really, and because that makes me more whole in my
Right.
experience,
Yeah.
because there's not any of these landmines that I'm avoiding.
Mm-hmm.
And so that makes it much harder to rattle me or get me upset about something. It's like, I've had experts do
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. That is very powerful. Now I know I have a note here that you had like self-harm at an early age. Like it looks like it's 12 where you had a
Oh,
suicide attempt.
side.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, that was, yeah, this was when we were in Tucson. I was completely overwhelmed being in this urban environment after having been in the middle of the woods, literally most of my life. And and all this sexual energy around me. Oh my God, around adolescence. I mean, seventh, eighth graders. And I mean, being in the locker room at the gym and the guys are running around sharing their hard-ons and rolling and scooting around on the floor of the shower to get off. And this was like it was the combination of the sexual abuse, which I didn't remember,
Right.
and just overwhelm of energy again. That
Mm-hmm.
it was way too much. And then being around kids all the time, which we were had no
Right.
social skills to deal with that. And so one day I went to the pool in this complex we were staying in. It was a trailer complex and a mobile home. And I jumped straight down into the 3 foot and slammed my head into the bottom of the pool.
Oh my goodness.
First of three major concussions in my life, I might add. Um, I lost my mathematical ability. It had significant brain damage. And
Hmm.
I think some of it was looking back. My mother was programming me to be a doctor and to be a professional singer. And so I used to sing a lot and play the piano a little bit. And I enjoyed that. It was okay. The doctor stuff I was mediocre about, but when I did the damage to my brain, that was really out. I just didn't have that capacity to
Hmm.
do that. And
Yeah.
so until I think it was keeping me on the right course in my life, if that
Yeah.
makes any.
No, it makes perfect sense to me. I'm all about things happening for a reason. So yeah.
And so it was a horrible experience. And I was disappointed that I couldn't learn the way I did before. But again, I don't, I'm unwilling to live my life as a victim. I
Mm-hmm.
don't see benefit or payoff in that. And I think that we've all been victimized, all of us. Nobody gets through childhood unscathed. It's not
No,
designed that
no, not, not. You're right. You're right.
way. So, but by taking back my power, and as a Buddhist, believing that I created all of this to become who I was to become, that allowed me to move forward without having to blame everybody else in the world for who I became.
Yeah. No, I know before we started recording, you commented I was talking about my mother being awful, and you said your mother was the good one, and so on. As a parent myself, I'm thinking if I had a child who did that at age 12 or well, any age actually, to me that would be a tremendous cry for help, and I would think I need to help this kid into some counseling or something because something must be going on if he's trying to kill himself at 12. So that never came about. I know it's a different time as well. I know in my experience, I'm going to be 60 this year. It was a very different time. We didn't talk about such things and so on, and teachers didn't get involved and so on. But I'm just curious, was there anything from mom where she's like, oh my goodness, my baby needs something here?
No,
No.
uh, because one, they couldn't afford it. They were very poor. Two is that, yeah, they could barely afford to go to the doctor,
Hmm.
uh, let alone therapy or anything. And that was just, nope, I'm the only person in my family that's ever been in therapy.
That's too bad.
Yeah, well, that explains why I don't have a relationship with them. Uh, yes, but yeah, vulnerability was not my family's forte.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah, no, I hear that as well. I hear that as well. So now it's interesting because you were already in your training to become a therapist when you realized these kind of, repressed memories, whatever we call them. But did that spur you to want to get into the type of therapy that you provide to clients now, or had you already always thought I'm going to work with people who've been traumatized, or how did that come about?
Well, my experience is that the clients choose you.
Mm.
I
I've heard this before. Yes. Hmm.
think that that you attract that what you're supposed to be working with.
Hmm.
And again, I certainly was still gaining clarity about the trauma that I went through in trauma. And so I'll tell you a short story. I When I started my first internship, and I was out in Contra Costa County up in the Bay Area, and I put out this little, I think it cost me $15 ad in a throwaway newspaper. And I was advertising a group for boys who'd been sexually abused or something like that. I, no, I had a, no, I, that's not true. I put a gay men's, I think it was a gay men's, but I got flooded with all these guys who had been sexually abused or who were bi, gay, heterosexually married, because the boys who were sexually abused gay boys sexually abused are much more likely to get heterosexually married,
Hmm.
because I have this deniability that I wouldn't be having these feelings if that hadn't happened.
Oh, right. It made me gay, right? Okay.
Exactly.
I gotcha. Okay, I gotcha.
And so that became that's what I became known for very quickly, and in trauma in general. But worked with tons of. I mean, all the women I've seen, I don't think there's maybe a couple that weren't raped or sexually assaulted somewhere along the way. And what we're growing to learn now is, and this doesn't surprise me, is that boys are probably sexually abused more often than girls,
Hmm.
because girls are more protected overall. Boys are just sent out into the world.
Yeah.
And so they're getting to all this shit, and it's getting them in all kinds of trouble. And then they have too much pride or shame in order to talk about it or share this experience that happened to them.
Right.
And so I don't believe in sexual addiction. I think it's a complete scam. That what it is, it's sexual trauma.
Hmm.
And they're actually compulsive because they're trying to find some way to resolve that trauma from the sexual abuse or
Right.
trauma. And so once you resolve, my experience is once you go in and resolve the trauma of the sexual experience, they're not compulsive anymore. It just goes away.
Wow.
But to label them, shame them about their sexuality, which is a lot of what these programs do, is criminal
Yeah.
in my, and I'm just horrified by this whole mindset
Yeah.
around this going to be this for the rest of your life, and there's no resolving it. It's like
Yeah.
bullshit. I've seen it happen time and time and time. And I was sexually compulsive. My God, was I sexually compulsive?
Yeah.
Uh, how could I have not been, given what I went through?
Right. Right.
And
It kind
so,
of making me think like addiction, right? So I mean, I've heard the term the root of addiction is pain, which I can certainly understand why that would be something people would say. So kind of along the same lines, is I've got this pain inside, and how I'm dealing with it is this compulsion, or in other cases, it's drugs, or it's alcohol, or it's whatever to sort of, I don't know, cover up. I'm not sure what word I want to use there. That pain that is in there, but
well,
yeah.
on an unconscious level, I think you're trying to process the experience.
Hmm.
But on a conscious level, I think you're just trying to find a positive way to hold this, in a
Right.
sense. A good experience to negate the bad one. It doesn't work that way, but I think that's kind of the unconscious process that's going on.
Wow.
So,
Yeah. Well, that makes sense. That absolutely makes sense. So I know you have your workshop. So tell us a bit about your workshop and kind of how it started, and who comes to your workshop, and what do you do there?
well, the workshop, I've been doing workshops for years, and I'm about to go in. Hopefully soon we'll be able to record the shedding light on the sexual abuse of boys and the men they become, because that's one of the things I'm really known for. But when I moved to the greater Los Angeles area here several years ago, uh, all of a sudden I kept getting asked questions about boundaries.
Mm-hmm.
And so I started putting together little workshops and teaching people, and it kept growing. And I started doing these full day things. And then COVID hit, and we had to go that online instead of in person. And then, so eventually, I developed this whole program called 7 Steps to Powerful Boundaries. And it is online on demand, so anybody can do it. And I recommend doing it in groups, getting a group view together and you buying them and then sharing your experience of going through this so that you keep each other on track, because it's hard for all of us to do these tasks that we don't have to do or maybe don't want to do, because it's a little painful, because boundaries are all about you. It's not about them.
Mm-hmm.
And and we learn our boundaries in our family. I call it the dance of intimacy. And so whatever dance you learn from your family, you just go out into the world and assume that's how the rest of the world operates.
Yep.
And so we have to go back. Step one is going back and looking at, what did you learn about boundaries in your family? Who said they loved you but treated you like shit?
Yeah. Yeah.
Because if that's what you think love is, then you're going to go out in the world and look for somebody who's going to treat you that way.
Yeah. Yeah. Unfortunately, that is so true. Yeah.
And so consequently, we have to go back through that and we have to look at this. Well, okay. And so one of the things I often said to clients, and this turned out to be a surprisingly healing experience, but I would say, is together as you are, given the childhood that you had, there's someone back there that you truly believed loved you unconditionally. And who was that person? And it's often a grandparent, actually, usually.
Mm-hmm.
And your grandmother, it's very, very common. And
Mm-hmm.
so, and I said, okay, so we get them in touch with that, and we do a whole exercise around really letting that in. And it can be really transformative, because they actually were as together as they were because of that happening, but they had never put the pieces together. And to truly let in and acknowledge this unconditional love is life changing.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, actually, as soon as you started talking about it, I flashed on my maternal grandmother, so I can see why that's the common one for people. Because certainly
mm,
she was the shining light in my childhood. That's for sure. As a matter of fact, she was probably the only light, but she was definitely the shining light in there. But yeah, so you've got the workshops, and I mean, you've got a couple of different websites. So tell us what you kind of do with your websites. What's on there? What would people find there? Um,
okay. Well, the unspokenboundaries.com is where the workshop is, the 7 steps to powerful boundaries. It'll take you through your whole life, and the steps 1 and 4 are the tough ones. That's you do your self work. Step 4 is about facing guilt and shame straight on, and I take you through quite a journey.
yeah.
People use guilt and shame to manipulate and control you.
Oh yeah.
So when you heal that and you have cleared that, it changes your whole experience to being in the world and boundaries, because they're manipulating your boundaries to get what they want out of it. And the rest of it is teaching about energetic boundaries and how they work and how you can protect and take care of yourself. A simple example is, if you believe in the power of positive thinking, of sending someone positive thoughts or prayers,
Right.
then you also have to believe in the power of negative thoughts to do damage.
Right.
So all those thought daggers. So the question is, how do you get rid of those? And
Right.
so that's
You
it's
mean
in there.
what we send at others, or ones we're aiming at ourselves? What do you mean by that?
I more about others aiming that at us,
Oh,
because
gotcha. Okay, gotcha.
if you have the power to send positive energy to somebody, you have the power to send negative energy to
Right,
somebody.
right.
And so you have to understand what's going on. And you have to then take those out. So, because I often tell people, if you're going along and all of a sudden everything you're touching is blowing up in your face,
Yeah.
you probably got hit with a thought dagger, and you need to get that out. And then everything will go back to being okay. It's just amazing. It's just, I've seen it happen time again.
Yeah.
So it's really profound.
So,
So, but there's little things like this that we don't talk about or think about, because it's not
mhm,
really part of culture. And so that's all part of the whole energetic boundaries, and understanding how energy is, we're made up of atoms. We're
mhm.
all, and so everything we're dealing with is energy, but we don't talk about this stuff in those terms. And so I go after that in a really big way. So
Yeah.
it's a
So, I mean,
different.
would this mostly be just for people who've had, crappy childhoods or have gone through some kind of trauma?
Anybody,
Okay.
because we all have situations where people are intruding upon us,
Hmm.
people trying to manipulate or control us. And so if you have real tools, well, a classic example, the number one anxiety is public speaking.
Hmm. Yep.
And the reason is because you get up in front of the audience, instead of staying in here,
Mhm.
being confident in who you are, you're out there giving them the power to decide whether you're good, bad, or ugly.
True. True.
And so there's an easy, simple trick using the energetic boundaries where you can just stay in your little bubble and they can do whatever they want to do and you're just going to be you and it just changes the whole dynamic.
Yeah.
It just
Yeah.
shifts the whole thing. So
Oh,
there's
I get that. I was painfully shy growing up. I mean, painfully shy. And the only grade of a C I ever received in my life was in high school that we had a speech class and we had to give a speech in front of the class and I was incapable of doing so. It made me physically ill. So the instructor said I could do my speech just in front of him, but I'd have to take a C for that. And to me that was a big deal, but I did do that. To where as an adult, I just gave a presentation yesterday, so it's kind of getting up in front of people is so natural to me now that it just yeah it's just one of those things where it's like I can't believe when I tell people about up through high school they're kind of like wait what and I think no really I really couldn't do it I couldn't speak so yeah no I get that a lot that's interesting interesting dynamic. I do want to ask you about, you said people maybe should do this in a group or at least more than just one person. So I'm curious to know, and of course, whenever I'm hearing people's stories in these interviews, my head starts to internalize it about, well, you'd have to share things then with people that maybe don't know these things about you or
well,
how,
you get to choose your group first of all.
right?
Hopefully, it's people that you know and trust. And two, you also get to choose how much you're going to share of your personal story. But it's a way of keeping you on task to get through it.
It's more
Because
like
it's seven.
accountability. It's accountability.
It,
It's having an exercise partner. I
yeah,
get okay.
it's 20 it's credited with 24 CEs for therapists in California.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So it's not
Yeah.
a short class.
No.
This is in depth. This is probably the deepest dive into boundaries you'll ever take, and it took me a
Yeah.
long time. I didn't record. It cost me a fortune,
Yeah.
but it is powerful, and it and the people. I this one story is one therapist who took my full day workshop when I was teaching that, and she took it, and and then she went the next week. She went to work, and she called her husband at the end of the day and said, I'm on my way home. He said, should I have your cocktail ready? Because she would see 9 clients a day typically.
Mm.
And she said, no, I'm fine. I said, okay. And she gets home, walks in, and he says, you sure you don't need a cocktail? And she says, no, I'm fine. I'll just freshen up, make dinner. And he says, Merle. She says, yes.
Wow.
Because the therapists who do this, because therapists are terrible about merging. They're terrible about absorbing their client stuff and then wonder why they're exhausted at the end of the day or the end of the week and they burn out and all this other stuff. So if you
Right.
can learn how to be present with someone and be a witness to their experience and not absorb their stuff,
Yeah.
you're not intruding upon them, you're not getting in their way, and you're giving them what they really need, which is somebody just with compassion and
Right.
empathy and presence
Right.
who isn't
Right.
horrified by their experience.
Yeah, that part is the big one, as we were talking about before we started recording, is that I don't like shocking my therapist. So I will oftentimes be very resistant to sharing a lot of things and thinking, I don't want her to have a reaction, a negative reaction. It's and I get it. I get it. So it's kind of yeah, finding someone who can listen to that, not and I call it not being judgmental too, because I think sometimes I feel like I've been judged about things or I don't know, maybe pigeonholed or stereotyped, so this thing happened to you, so you must be X. And I think, no, that's not me. So don't think it's gonna be me. But yeah, I get that. So how many people have been through your workshop so far, would you guess?
Oh, 200 or 300.
Okay, wow, yeah,
So, yeah. So we're finding that the one that's all self-directed is less easy sell, and so that's why I moved to this model of picking. If you're a therapist, pick another therapist to do this with that you trust, and you can go
yeah,
through this with. And other people, it keeps us on track and gets it through it. And also having somebody talk about it. This is bringing up a lot of big stuff.
yeah,
I
yeah,
mean, and so and some people may end up in therapy as a consequence because they get clear they have to work on this, and so
yeah,
which is good.
yeah.
Uh, it's good for therapists. It's good for non-therapists because everybody can generally use better boundaries.
Yes, no doubt about it. No, absolutely, no doubt about it. Yeah, and sometimes I know in my life when I set those up, I start to feel a little guilty or selfish that I've set up this boundary, and I think it's got nothing to do with it. It's got to do with me, and it's not. I'm not being selfish or whatever
Well,
standoff.
that's why that whole one on guilt and shame. You have to
Yeah,
address that because we give. That's how we get trained and manipulated to give away our power. It's by
yeah,
being guilted and shamed by other people,
yeah,
and That's more about them than you.
Yep. 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 I'll tell you something kind of fun. I was raised Catholic, and shame is it's kind of a big deal in the Catholic religion. So the word that triggers me is disappointed. So I had a boss a few years ago tell me he was disappointed in something, and it set me, oh, did that trigger me? I was furious, angry, and then I was sobbing, and I thought, why is that word getting to me so much? And it was because it's so ingrained that the shame of someone you disappointing someone was such a big deal for me. But I remember thinking that, boy, I haven't responded to a word like that in ever that I can think of. And I actually
It's
I wrote him a note, and I put a bunch of links to different psychological sites and told him why that was a really bad word to use with someone. And he came back and said, "Well, I'll be careful not to use it with you since it seems to trigger you." As if, and I thought, you didn't learn anything, but whatever, whatever. Just don't, yeah, don't use it with me again, and we'll be solid there. But we're thinking, you didn't quite learn from that, did you? You're using that to manipulate me, and you realize it can manipulate me, and that's not okay. So yeah, yeah, that was my experience with learning that. Yeah, the guilt part of it was how powerful that can be. It just can be, yeah, yeah. I'm
and
disappointed you would
so
do.
ubiquitous in our culture. It's just a
Yeah,
part of the culture. And so when you're not shameable or not guiltable, they don't know what to do with you.
right, right, right. It's true. It's
It's
so
like, oh,
true. Yeah, and it's a power play. It's a really a power play. When I look back on that experience with that boss, it was him totally trying to put me down to a space where he was the powerful one and I was the, non-compliant, lazy, whatever he was disappointed in that event. And I actually don't remember what it was, but yeah, I remember thinking to myself, that's not okay. That's not, yeah, you don't get to talk to, especially, I mean, even a child, but definitely not a fellow adult coworker and tell them that you're disappointed, especially when you mean it in a way to be, you're trying to be mean. He was definitely trying to be mean. He was
oh.
trying, and it worked. It actually did hit me, obviously. So it's kind of like I had to think, I gotta get over that word, that's for sure. But yeah, I think sometimes we don't know that those things are buried in our head until it actually comes up, right? I mean, it's like that something will come up and I'll think, oh my goodness, and I'm totally, triggered on whatever that might be, and think that's not okay. Obviously, it's something I gotta let go because I don't want any part of it anymore.
It's a great EMDR target.
Yeah,
So to go on, so I do a couple of things. So my website is merleyost.com.
right.
And it's a massive website. I mean, it'll take you a week to go through the whole thing because it's huge. And I have a whole article on buying gay men who are heterosexually married. I have a whole section on that. Then I have a whole section on men who are sexually abused as children. And there's a whole lot of other stuff. I've been in documentaries. I'm known internationally because of gynecomastia, which is men with female-like breast. Because I had that. Is if I didn't have enough going on at the age of 11, I developed breasts. So yay!
One more thing, right?
And children are not kind to other children
No,
when
they are not. Children are horribly cruel to one another. That's for sure.
and so I had my so after my first surgery, I started a website called gynecomastia.org, and it turned into this massive success. There's like 100,000 visitors a month.
Yeah.
And so back in the early days of the web, and then I eventually sold it. But and then I had my second surgery, and a film crew from Australia flew in and filmed that, and so forth. And so, and BBC and Channel 4 both came in and did documentaries on me from London. And so I've had a lot of press, and all of that's on there, and different
Yeah.
podcasts I've
Yeah, and that's
TV.
a topic that I'm sure people don't talk about because it's embarrassing or shameful or it's whatever. I don't want to, whatever it might be. So we don't talk about it. So when you say 100,000 views, it just shows you how many people actually were interested in this topic and possibly experiencing this or know someone who was and wanted to learn more about it. So it's I'm glad you put this website together. It's kind of like whenever I hear those, it's like there had to be somebody out there that experienced this and, look into it. You're not alone. You're not all by yourself. This isn't just you that happened to. And, and especially if you're in a family that may not be supportive and not recognize, this is, it happens. It's nature, whatever it might be, but let's see if we can get you some help, that kind of thing. So,
Liver issue, actually, as
yeah,
it turns
yeah.
out. But yeah, so my fifth book is on gynecomastia, and my sixth book is my last book is called Facing the Truth of Your Life. And so I take on things like forgiveness and self-love, which I also don't believe in, and all these other things. And so it's one of my psychology psychologist friend said, "You're trying to destroy the American way of being." I said, pretty much.
Yeah, well, that's how we make progress in this world, right? Is it's like, you have to challenge that status quo because, we
Yeah,
especially just with science. I mean, it's like what we believe today is going to be different than what we know in, however in the future, whatever, right? I mean, this is the way it is. So the normal way of treating things, I mean, left-handed children, for example, forcing them to use their right hand, right? All these different things like that. It's like, well, that's not we don't do that anymore. At least we hope we don't do that anymore. What we used to think that was the norm. We're setting them up for a better life because they're going to be not left-handed, just as that example. So, yeah, no. So I mean, people like you are the ones that make those mind changes that we then learn. Oh, actually, that wasn't the way to do it over here. So, we should go down this road. And in 20, 30 years, it'll be, that nobody will remember. Well, they'll talk about the old ways and like we talk about, horrific scientific experiments or something like that. Where it's like, no, we don't do it that anymore, and so on. So yeah, so I'm glad you're kind of looking at it from a way what actually works rather than believing, what you hear, what you see, or even what we learn in school. I mean, I can think of some things where I've learned, and I would then, as I got out of school, think, now I'm challenging that now because it actually isn't. It is at least isn't my truth. So that kind of comes up as well. Yeah.
yeah. I'm also doing intensives. People come to me for 5 consecutive days, and I see them for 10 hours over 5 days.
Right.
They have a lot of homework before they get here because I have to do a thorough assessment before I jump
Right.
into deep school. But people can clear an enormous amount of trauma in 5 days.
I would imagine it's draining though. I mean, in a number of ways, good ways and bad ways, right? I would think. I don't know. I just
Actually, usually coming out of it fully alive
oh wow.
because it's not because we're clearing it. It's one of
Yeah,
the benefits of MDR. And I'm a somatic therapist. I'm a trained Gestalt therapist, and
right.
so I'm fearless and then going
Yeah.
after this stuff. And I've had so many tell me it just completely changed their life, and it really
Yeah.
did. So
I would imagine so. I would imagine so. It would be I would be thinking about to get to trust this person who's running this event because you open Pandora's box and you got to have somebody who can handle that. So, you know, that would be my thought on that. When I'm thinking, oh, but interesting. But five days, I would think that would be exhausting personally. But that's just my thought on it, obviously not knowing much about it.
it well, it's not been my experience. I
Yeah.
mean,
Yeah. Well, again, it's my,
again,
my my unconscious bias thinking I know what I don't know, and I obviously don't know. So, I'm,
yeah,
I'm judging it just by when you say intensive. See, the word intensive to me automatically, oh, it's going to be, what that, so
blast them
overwhelming.
at the focus of the 5 days. I don't want them doing 400 other things. I want them to
Right,
have time to ponder and chew on this after the session and
right,
do any writing they need to do or exercise and take care of themselves so
yeah,
that they actually get to be held in this bubble for that 5 days
right,
of healing.
right, right.
So they can come out the other side a really different person as a
Yeah,
consequence.
that's probably why the 5 days works, is because if you're doing it 1 hour a week, for example, yeah. So I'm just when I think about that, I'm thinking, that probably wouldn't be, it's like wearing braces on your teeth, but you only wear them,
Yeah.
1 day a week. You're not likely gonna get your teeth straightened out, or at least not anytime soon. So I would imagine it's kind of like that. But
2 consecutive hours is about all they can tolerate, which is
mm,
fine. And so, but the thing I like about this is when you're doing weekly therapy, that you get into this stuff and then you leave and then you come back a week later and you're in a completely different place. And
mhm,
so you may or may not get back to that. And so by doing it 5 consecutive days, you're picking right up where you left off and you
right,
just keep going.
right,
You know?
right.
But
Making
people do
progress.
this committed to facing whatever they want to face. So
Yeah, yeah. I would imagine so. Wow. You've been one of my most fascinating interviews. I can do that right now. I make notes as I'm talking to people, and I'm like, I got 3 pages of notes sitting here, right? So, is there anything else you'd like to share before we end today? Anything else that you think would be helpful for listeners? Or and we're going to put links to your websites and all that in the notes for the podcast, so people will be able to find you and read more about you and friendship books and so on. But anything else you'd want to share?
I would say if I could leave the thought is that almost anything is survivable. Uh, and I've often been asked, like growing up in that cult, what made me question that? What got me out of that? Because my siblings never really got out of it, in a
Mm,
sense. And I said, well, being gay saved my life
Hmm.
because I was being programmed like every other kid to think who you're going to marry, what you're going to name your children, and all the other stuff that it's just sort
Right.
of part of the indoctrination. And it didn't fit for me.
Right. Oh,
So
it's
that made
fascinating.
me
Yeah.
question other things as
Yeah.
well.
Ah,
So,
that's
so,
amazing. That makes so much sense.
so when you, so when something doesn't fit, I invite you to question it. Why does this not fit? Because there may be something really important going on here.
Yeah.
And so, and we tend to give people too much of the benefit of the doubt, and particularly our parents and, and authority figures. And so, consequently, in the end, we're responsible for our life. We're
Yeah.
responsible for what we do with it. I mean, and we're responsible for how we heal from it.
Right. And not staying stuck in a space where, I mean, I don't know. Life is short, and staying stuck with a bunch of baggage doesn't sound like my idea of a good life, quality life at least.
There's no payoff
No.
unless you like being masochistic. And as I often tell my clients, there are more fun ways to be masochistic. This is not it.
Yeah. 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 Well, Merle, thank you so much for your time today. This has been an absolute pleasure. I will spend my afternoon now looking up your website. So it's like it's like I always come away with, oh, I need to know more about that. I need to know more about that. So yeah, I'm always fascinated. But thank you so much for your time. I really, really appreciate it.
Well, thank you so much for having me. This has been an absolute delight, and I hope that your listeners gain a lot of insight from it. And if they have any questions about anything I've done, please contact me through my website, either one of them. I'll be happy to get back to them. So there you go.
Great. Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Good Grief. To hear more about my personal story, please pick up a copy of my book, The Day I Became the Spider Killer, a memoir of trauma, tragedy, and survival, available in paperback, Kindle, and Audible via Amazon, Barnes& and Noble, and other online book retailers.